Good evening, everyone, and welcome. My name is Hunter Ohanian, and I'm the director of the College Art Association. I think probably a lot of you know our speaker this evening, Ron Amato, but let me just tell you a little bit about his background. Ron is from New York, was actually born in Brooklyn. And his earliest influences were actually fashion and portrait photography. And when you look through the work, you'll be able to see some of those influences. He looked at work by people like Richard Avedon, Robert Mapplethorpe, and of course, Scavullo. Most of Ron's adult work centers around the male figure. In the 1990s and in the early 2000s, Ron had a successful commercial career working for fitness and sports magazines, including Men's Health, Men's Fitness, and Sports Illustrated. His recent work centers around issues of aging in the gay community, something some of us can definitely relate to, and diverse images of male beauty. He also likes to think about the idealized body manipulation, image, and social media, as well as embracing same-sex attraction. And for those of us who are involved in the gay community, certainly we know how each of those areas actually can and do and don't impact our lives. Ron has been teaching and is currently an associate professor, tenured professor, and is the former chairman of the photography department at the Fashion Institute of Technology here in New York. And of course, he's exhibited extensively in the US and internationally, and his work has been published in a number of anthologies. He has a BFA from the School of Visual Arts and an MFA from Long Island University, and he lives here in Brooklyn with his husband Seth, who's back over here. So what I'd like to do is sort of break this up into several parts. And actually, the two most important things are to hear from Ron about the work, but also to hear from all of you as well, too, as far as questions or comments or observations that you have about the work, the process, the craft, what this particular artist is doing. So think about that. We'll get to that at the end. And let me just ask Ron to start here and walk us through the work in the box. The box just came out, what, a month ago?
No, today.
Today? Oh.
May 1st is the release, although Amazon pushed the release to June 1st. So this is the only place right now in New York that you can get the book. So Strand is the only place that has it.
Great.
If you ordered it from Amazon, I don't know if they'll ship before June 1st, but the official release date has been moved. Amazon moved it to June 1st for whatever internal reasons.
So be sure before everybody leaves to get a copy of it. And Christmas is only 6 months away for your friends as well, too.
Great.
So, anyway, why don't you walk us through the work and let's take a look at it.
Okay, so thank you all for coming. I truly appreciate you being here. I'm really excited to share this project with you. I started about 2 years ago. I started photographing for this project, and we'll probably get into how it evolved over the 2 years. But I'll just tell you how the book is kind of set up. So it's a very reflective project for me. My work up until this point was reactive. I am of an age where I'm now reflecting on a lot of my past, and especially my past as a gay man, and how I dealt with those issues, and how I came to the point in my life where I just said recently in an interview that being gay is resolved for me. The only conflict now is external. So within myself, I am resolved and have dealt with all those issues. But the book takes you through those kinds of periods, and I think that is super relatable for most of us, gay or straight. I think that it's very relatable and universal. So it starts basically with me as a child. And that's me on the bike, learning to ride my bike in the 60s. I grew up in the 60s and 70s in Brooklyn, New York, in a very middle-class, working-class neighborhood. So you could imagine that being a little gay boy was not necessarily something I was willing to embrace during that time. So in thinking about this and working with the prop of the box, these emotions started to reveal themselves as I was going through the shoots. I really started, just a really quick story is that I've been teaching for 14 years, and one of the things that I tell my students all the time is I don't want to see any studio equipment in the photographs. I think it's really lazy to put studio equipment as props in photographs. So they were not allowed to photograph these studio boxes that were sitting around in the studio unless they had a reason, unless there was a conceptual reason to have a box in the photograph. And then I started thinking, what would that conceptual reason be? And I started to think about using a box as kind of a prop for overcoming adversity, and that's really where I started. So it was, I brought a model, my first model into, he was Nick Posenteri, who is a yoga master, has some serious control over his body, and I put a box on set, and I put Nick on set, and I said, Nick, you're overcome, this box is causing, it's an obstacle that you need to overcome. How would you express that with your body? And he was amazing and did it. And so I started with this idea of the box as an obstacle, and then moved on to the box as kind of a pedestal to represent empowerment. And then went to the next shoot and the next shoot, and these 8 emotional themes started to rise up from when I was what I was seeing in the photographs. So that's how the book is broken up. It's 8 chapters, taking you chronologically through what I think is my personal development from childhood to present day. And I want to stress that this is my order. And I think for other people, the order can be different, but I think it's a very universal kind of emotional set that we go through. And that these things aren't necessarily delineated as time periods. I think that these emotional time periods are kind of woven into each other, and some rise up again and then fall away again. But to me, this really says the kind of thing. So I start here with isolation. And so the first section of the book is isolation, and it's mostly single figures inside the box, or in some way dealing with the box as an island, thinking of the box as an island. A number of times in a number of these sections, I think of the box as an island, and an island to be crossed. And then we go to longing. That's Nick. Adversity. A number of the models are here tonight, so you might see some familiar faces in the crowd from the photographs. Conflict. Desire. Connection. Community. And again, thinking about these smaller boxes as islands. Maybe people notice this, maybe they don't. Every one of these men has a foot on the middle box. So that was kind of my instruction to them, is that you're bridging these islands, you're crossing these islands and kind of trying to occupy the same space and support each other while doing it. And finally, empowerment. That's it in a nutshell.
That's it. So how many images are in the book?
There's 108 images in the book. The opening spreads all start with a black and white image, and then everything else is in color.
And how long was the period that you took to actually make the images?
a year and a half, about 18 months, give and take.
Yeah. So it's interesting how you have organized it. As I think about some of the concepts that you place here, longing, adversity, conflict, desire, did you start out with those, or did you end up coming up with those after you started seeing the work?
Exactly. So they started to reveal themselves to me. So while I'm in the studio, and maybe some of the guys can kind of attest to what the process was. Inside the box is one thing, outside the box is something else. But like just based on the interior box, putting bodies inside the box, there's a lot of kind of things that are happening on people's faces, it just in the way they're moving their bodies and the way they're kind of relating to each other. And as I would see something, I would ask them to move in a certain way inside the box. And if I saw something that was hitting on something, I would stop them and I would just kind of adjust it and kind of really slowly explore that. What I was seeing there, whether it was desire or whether it was conflict or whatever it was. And then I guess halfway through, I was probably 6 to 8 months in, that I really started to parse these things out. I really started to look at this bulk of photographs that I had and started to put them in buckets. And then it got to the point where the later shoots, I identified these 8 things. I didn't know I was making a book yet, but I identified these 8 kind of emotional buckets that I had divided the work into, and I actually, for some of the last shoots, wrote those on the edge of the seamless paper of the set, so that it would be a reminder to the guys when they were getting on set that they would constantly be seeing these things, and then they could start emoting for me. I mean, it was I hope that they feel that it was a very collaborative process. I really took from them as much as I gave anything to them.
So how many models did you work with in this project?
It's 32, I think. Yeah.
Great. That's very ambitious.
It was very ambitious.
Yeah.
I have to say that if there's any photographer, there are photographers in the room, but if you declare that you're going to make a book eventually, you better be prepared to make a lot of photographs.
Why do you say that?
Well, I think when you've got a standalone project like this, as opposed to a book that is covering kind of your career over years, or you've accumulated those images over years. When you've got this standalone project that you say, okay, I want this to be a book, you need to make many, to get it down to this, to get it down to where you're happy, where everything is serving a purpose, right? Everything in the book is serving a purpose. You need to be able to edit from a very large bucket of images.
Yeah. That's actually a good point of usable images. Let's put aside the ones that the lighting wasn't what you wanted, or they were slightly out of focus, because that happens to all of us. But of the usable images, what percentage do you think we're actually seeing here?
Oh God.
10%? 5%?
Less. Yeah, 5%. What do you think? Seth knows. That's my husband, Seth, right there. Seth is looking over my shoulder most of the time while I'm editing. So, yeah, I'd say maybe 5%. Yeah.
Good. But that's good, because it gives the audience a sense of the amount of work that's there. How did you go about picking the individual models? What was driving you in any particular direction?
It's interesting, because that's a very common question. So there are a lot of beautiful people in the world, right? There are a lot of beautiful men. Social media plays a large role in how I identify these people, but I always have a running list of people I want to photograph, whether it's for this project or a different project. I don't know if they're right for a specific project, but I've got a running list. I keep spreadsheets of models' names, photographs, and if I get any other information like their height, I keep a spreadsheet of models. That why I want to photograph them is the question. So there's plenty of beautiful men who have approached me and asked me to be part of something, and I've turned them down.
So talk about that some.
You know, I've done a number of interviews, and the only thing I can say is that it's not identifiable. Why? I think intrigue is part of it. Attraction certainly plays a role. You know, if people are sexually attractive to me or just beautiful, even in a non-sexual way, that plays a role. But there's something else that's I don't even want to find out what it is, and it's different, I think, for all of them. Interesting, intriguing, complex. I think complexity plays a big part in it. That if somebody looks complex to me in some way, either I imagine them to be complex or they actually present themselves that way, I think that has a lot to do with it. Now, putting that, some of the men were together by happenstance because somebody wasn't available, somebody else was available. So there are some logistics that come into play with the combination of men. But there were times where I was able to actually match the men that I wanted to be together in that box. Some of it was because they were very, very similar. I talk about Rowan, Justin, and Jimmy, who you'll see in here. I really pursued them to be together because they were younger, and their bodies were more like mine when I was younger. So they were kind of slim, tapering limbs. And I said, I need this to be part. Once I realized it was autobiographical, I said, I need this element to be part of it because that's who I was at that time. And then there are other times where Patrick's here, right here. Hi, Patrick. Patrick, L, and Jack. What was great about putting them together is that they were diverse. They were all three. It was three different races. They were different ages, and so that for that shoot, that's what I wanted. I wanted the diversity in both age and ethnicity. So each shoot kind of had a different feel, a different something that I thought was missing. If I needed something specific to kind of make it a richer communication.
Yeah, and it seems as if when you go through the body types in the book, first pass you think that there's a lot of similarity, but then when you really go through them slower and you spend more time with them, I noticed when I went through it in the beginning that there are a number of different body types here. At first I thought I was seeing one artist individual taste, but then I was seeing, which I hear from you saying that there is some of that's
absolutely
in here, you know, and there is that personal side of it, but the view that you're revealing for here.
I think it's also trends.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of trend happening here. Sure. So, you know,
well, you made the book in 2015,
that's right.
2016. Also, I think it's very true in the sense it's reflecting men as they look right.
So
right
there's
now.
a beard thing,
good, sure.
There's a tattoo thing,
Sure.
there's body hair is kind of being embraced more than it used to be. So all of that kind of shows up regularly. And one of the things about the body hair, I shot for Men's Health for a while and these magazines, and I was so tired of like shaved bodies. It doesn't reflect reality in many cases. So one of the things I have this email that I send to that's kind of boilerplate, and I kind of customize the dates and the times and everything. But one of the thing is don't shave your body hair. If it's shaved already, okay, but if it don't touch it, because I think that a lot of the men that are modeling are used to some photographers asking them.
Sure.
To remove their body hair.
Sure. And the thing I think that's really nice about that is the sense as you think about artists who have documented the male form, if you think back about the body types in Thomas Eakins' work, or you think about the body types in F. Hollanday's work, or even if you think recently even if you look at the body types that are in Mapplethorpe's work or that are in Peter Hujar's work. It was definitely before a time of a lot of the accoutrement that gay men have about their bodies right now. You know, they're not big muscles, and there's not a lot of facial hair, and there certainly are not a lot of tattoos. Right? And so, but it's nice to have each of these periods sort of reflecting the fashion and the culture and the style of the time. Since you did work, you've done commercial work for quite a while. Even though you have your MFA, you certainly have done a lot of it. How have you dealt with the dichotomy between making work in the commercial world versus making fine art work, which you would certainly consider this to be a piece of fine art? How have you had to struggle with that?
I don't struggle with it that much anymore because I have been teaching for 14 years. So the fine art work really is what I do now as my practice. But I will tell you that early in the late 90s and early 2000s, I did struggle with that a lot. And I was shooting for, it's funny, I was shooting for Men's Health at the same time that I was doing a project on photographs of me having sex with other men. And I had a show of that work in Richard Anderson's Fine Arts in Chelsea in 2000. And I really struggled with, I didn't tell anybody at these magazines that was happening. I really thought that, I didn't know what the reaction would be to that. So I did keep them completely separate. And the creative director of Men's Health, I went there for a meeting and he said, "Why didn't you tell me about this?" He said, I missed this show. I'm so sorry that somebody told me about this show. So it was my own kind of like, censorship that I self-censored in many ways. It was a struggle for me. I think it would be less of a struggle now because I think the industry has changed a great deal. So I think there's an embrace of fine artists that are shooting commercially now. So it's not as separated and kind of in those silos anymore. Sure.
Well, you brought up the sexual thing, which is sort of interesting because we can certainly look at the human form, and obviously genitalia is part of the human form. But again, in this collection, there is some genitalia, but there's not a lot of it. Was that intentional on your part, or how did that end up working out?
So I will not go to any lengths to cover genitalia, and I
won't say that again.
I will not go to any lengths to cover the genitalia. There are very few men who I've agreed to photograph who say I do not want to full frontal nudity in any of these photographs. That's kind of a deal breaker for me. There are some people who I've wanted, so I've agreed to it, and I've regretted it, to be honest with you, because I think the convoluted positioning and these things, this self-consciousness while you're shooting, it's so confining when you're making the work. So with that said, my focus for this particular project was not genitalia. So whatever it happened to happened. And so in many cases, when they're moving around inside the box, it's hard to see anything at all. So there isn't a lot of genitalia in the book, just simply out of happenstance. I am doing a project that's all about genitalia simultaneously, so that's kind of interesting. But I didn't go to any lengths, but it wasn't about the penis. This was not about a book about the penis. Other than the penis is attached to the body.
And certainly, of course, I mean, genitalia in many cases has nothing to do with how sexy a particular picture might be, or the desire associated with it as well too. So it raises just kind of a interesting professional question, which is the fact you are a tenured faculty member in a state school.
I am.
And so you have colleagues in your field, and you also deal with a lot of students as well too. And we live in a very cautious environment these days in many ways. And certainly, I think we're going to be seeing more caution and more restriction going on. How is it working at FIT and making work that involves a fair amount of nudity and particularly openness about the sexuality of it?
So it's a process. I don't think there's a few of my colleagues here from the department, and as well as students here, and I don't think my colleagues in the department or the students have an issue at all. I don't think for them it's not an issue. I think it's more administrative. There's been a little bit of an education that has happened, I think, with my work. That the first time that I submitted something to a faculty show, it was rejected.
For content?
They didn't say that.
Yeah.
But
you assume it was
I didn't
rejected.
hit the theme right on the nose, is what they said, which they have these themes, and I made something that dealt with the theme in a more conceptual way and not a material way, and it was rejected, and it happened to be a man that was full frontal nudity. And the next time I did it, they took it, but it was a little bit kind of circuitous about how to get to it within the gallery. There was no reason to see that, to pass that image, unless you knew it was there and had to approach it. And so, I think that was progress. And then now, I think it's pretty embraced by many people in the college. I think they've accepted that this is the work I make, and that it's of a certain quality, and that they're proud of it to a certain degree. So I think we're getting there. I think there was a process of kind of me, I hate saying me having to educate them, but to a certain degree I think that's true.
Yeah. And so it doesn't present an obstacle at this point?
At this point it does not present an obstacle. No.
How do you feel about the way men can sometimes objectify the male figure versus the way female artists don't objectify? And when I first saw this work, I thought back about Ruth Bernhardt's that beautiful figure where she's actually placed the model inside her enlarger box.
Right.
I think that goes back to like 1964.
60s,
yeah, it's a beautiful, beautiful image.
Right.
But Ruth Bernhardt is one that I think really is happily put, was able to put the female form out there, and it seems that men also do it as well. But what do you think about the difference between the genders as far as men showing the form more than females?
I mean, I have to be honest. I'm not an art history teacher, so it's not a subject that I really know that much about, just from observation. I think that straight men approach the female form in a certain way. I think that gay men probably approach the male form in a very, very similar way. And I think that straight women probably approach the male form in a different way than, so I think it's less about sexuality and more about the gender difference and the way that I think, that men have been objectifying women in art for centuries, since the beginning of time.
Right.
And I hope that my stuff is not seen as objectifying, but it is. I am objectifying to a certain degree, of course.
We'll talk about that. I mean, do you think you are objectifying?
I think I'm celebrating male beauty in many ways. I like men. I like looking at men. I like looking at beautiful images of men. I talk about this. I'm in Italy every year. I teach a class in Italy. I stand in front of the David every single year. This will be my 10th time this June. And I walk around it and walk around it and stare at it and walk around it and stare at it. I never tire of that. And now that's an amazing work of art,
Sure.
but it also is a beautiful man. So I think that, that dynamic is there. So, of course, the part of what I'm doing is objectifying men, for sure. For my own consumption.
Sure.
Really.
We've talked a lot about your own view and how much of yourself you put in this project, and I particularly like the idea of the fact at this point in your life that you find yourself being more reflective than being reactive. That's sort of interesting. I have to think.
Except
about
my new project, Gay in Trumpland,
Oh,
is completely reactive.
Gay and Trumpland. Wow, that would be interesting.
I don't think that'll be a book, but
yeah. But so I understand what you get out of it, but what do you want all of us to get out of it? How are we empowered by this work?
I'm not sure I'm trying to empower anybody. What I would say is that I would like them to see themselves reflected in it. That is more, it's the universality of it, the relatability. If I have articulated something that people are struggling to articulate themselves, then I've done something, you know. And honestly, I've received many messages from people who feel exactly that. So I feel very satisfied on some level that it has struck that note with at least some people. So that, yeah.
And I mean, don't you feel that that is empowering good people in the sense you're giving?
Of course,
yeah.
Of course. I don't want to be presumptious, like I'm empowering you, but you know, wherever it takes you.
Yeah. I mean, we all get to do that. I mean, even having a conversation like this, people will walk away and think about their own sexuality. It has the effect of empowering thing. Absolutely. Every step we take empowers someone to do something. So it's great. Questions or comments that people have? Observations? Yes.
So, here on.
Hi. Thank you.
So, if it's not too personal to get the response, you broke up the book in 8 sort of sections of your life, right? And so there's conflict and there's, all these. What particular, obviously, you don't need to go through each category of your life, but like, conflict in your life, like what is there a particular moment in your life? Is it a certain decade, or is it just sort of an internal?
I think conflict is one of those things. It's internal and external, of course, and I think conflict is one of those ones that says woven in and out through. And I grew up I went to 12 years of Catholic school in a very working class environment. So my friends chased faggots out of the neighborhood. Ran them down the street. So when you are secretly gay in that environment, it was a fairly tough neighborhood. It was the 60s and 70s. And, I was frightened all the time that somebody would find me out. So the conflict was really coming from that external source for most of my life. And I have to say my 20s were terrible because of it, because I didn't know what to do at that point. I didn't know how to break out of that mindset. So it took a very long time for me to come to terms with it. And actually, I remember the first time I ever sat in a restaurant with a man. I had been having sex in secret for a very long time, but then to actually be in public and to be sitting across the table from a man and like acknowledge that this is a date was incredibly frightening and incredibly exhilarating and really empowering at the same time. So does that address? Okay.
Yeah, I remember the first time I went to a movie with somebody. It was really sort of an amazing thing to do because it is admission. But go back to the 1960s and 70s. I'm sort of curious. That question made me think about what role models were out there, gay role models that or even people that you even suspected were gay, either through pop culture or through people around you.
They were clowns.
Such as?
They were well, I mean, when you look at people like Liberace and people like that, people like even somebody like Barry Manilow, who Elton John, these are people who are caricatures. Right. Maybe not Manilow so much, but when you think about Elton John and Liberace, and these are the people of my childhood that I saw on television. And now the things that I didn't even realize that I read about as an adult is that the gay villain in all of these in movies from the 30s and the 40s, and that subtly there was an effeminate villain in there that was reinforcing this idea of what the gay man was. But on a personal level, there were very few out gay people in my life. But the ones that were treated, they were embraced, but embraced on the level that they were the clowns. They were funny, they were cute,
Paul Lynn, Charles Nelson.
Right. And I had a number of those that populated my world personally. But they acted, they were the funny. They had you in stitches, and that's that.
It wasn't the head of the Ford Foundation.
They could not be taken seriously. They would not be taken seriously, and they put themselves in that position out of self-protection. Sure. In many ways.
Sure. Other quick comments, quick questions? Yes.
Kind of bounces off of that because when I look at the images in your book, they're all very, everyone in there and the way that they're depicted, the poses and such, are very masculine. And so I'm curious, after hearing what you say, was in some way masculinity an important part of the imagery, and was that intentional? And did femininity ever come into play, or staying away from that, since you just said the gay people you knew when you were younger typically were more effeminate?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I think there's been a lot of part of my growing and my development has been learning to own my own masculinity. You know, I mean, so I think that in many ways that may be reflected in this, is that the messages was that we weren't masculine, that we couldn't be masculine, that we were inherently not masculine. And I think that it took me a long time, and the whole gym culture, kind of this gay gym culture, is like taking back our masculinity in a way. And I was part of that. I was, you know, I started to build my body, and once I realized, you're a fucking man. Like, act like a man, be a man. You want to be a man, so don't give in to this perception of who you are and just to please somebody else. So I appreciate masculinity very, very much. So I guess my that's where I move when I make the photographs. I don't think that maybe I do, but I don't know that I outwardly try to.
Well, I think what I notice is that you almost give masculinity an opportunity to feel, because there are so many, especially in the places where there are connections. Typically, it feels like with straight men, it's almost looked down upon to show affection to another man. And here you have all of these images of really masculine men feeling for each other, which I think really that's what I connect with.
Yeah, touching each other in a loving. I think that.
Say that again. Sorry.
Touching and grinding against each other. Three of us are in the box.
Right.
I don't know these guys. Meanwhile, his thing is in my face, and this one, you know, we're sweating and our bodies are grinding together. And, you know,
Sure.
first when I met them.
Right.
It was fun.
I'm glad. But I think also, besides the sexual implications, which I think were very present, I think there's also an affection that comes through there, which I think that is more important almost. I mean, I think that most people know that we grind against each other. I think that seeing the vulnerability and the reliance on each other and the affection for each other is more important to show.
Yeah, and there is certainly a brotherhood or a fraternity that comes out of it as well too, in those kind of
Make good
contexts.
friends too.
Right, that's right. You can do
A lot of that. That's really gratifying for me, because a lot of the guys have become friends.
Yeah, friends, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting as you talk about masculinity and also the feminine side. I mean, certainly many of us grew up in an age in which just as you were saying, you could not expose any sense of feminine behavior because it was such a sexist world.
Right.
That at least we had one leg up over women,
Right.
the fact that we were men,
Right.
but that we had to cover who we were as homosexuals in order to not be perceived as feminine, and that was almost worse. You know, whatever was happening behind closed doors was happening, but when you were out in public, it would really be bad to be perceived with a feminine tank top. And I think that's where a lot of the masculinity that we've seen gay culture gravitate towards since the 1970s really comes from, and the fact that they want to get beyond it. Other quick questions or quick comments? Yes, Earl.
So, I'm really curious, when you were, after you had really thought through how you were going to prepare for the were there ever any instances where you paired them up and then the two, just the chemistry,
The lack of, or
is just not there, or
Yeah.
they get in the box and they look at you?
yeah, I'm not going to identify who those people were, but Yeah, for sure. And that's a struggle. And to their credit, I think they powered through it and gave me what I needed. But yeah, it became obvious a number of times that, on the other hand, there were a number of times where it was like these people, strangers, got into a room, and it was like they had known each other forever and just gelled in ways that. And there was one shoot in particular where I just stood back and let them be, and let them hang out on set and work it out on their own. I stopped them a couple of times just to adjust an arm but they just gelled really, really well. That was really unusual, that level of gel. I think that Anthony and John, who are sitting right here in front of you, I think they gelled really well. I think that Marco is right there. Marco and Brad and Chris gelled pretty well, wouldn't you say? Yeah. So I think for the most part, it really worked. It was very few, but there were those moments when it was obvious from the very beginning. I think that, it's human nature, and I also think it's a really odd situation to be in. It's a really odd, you're coming into, first of all, I shoot it all at FIT, so you're walking into this state school, and if you've never been at FIT, it's extremely institutional looking, so it looks like a high school. So you're walking into the school, and you are coming into a classroom, basically, and closing the door and taking your clothes off, and shaking a hand of another naked person, and then crawling into a box with them. So I think that the moments when it might not have gelled was because one of the people was so maybe processing and not really kind of getting there, that it didn't allow them to really give.
You said that you were working on a new body of work.
I am.
Yeah, tell us a little bit about that.
So I, as many people, have had an extreme reaction to what happened last year. Really in denial for a long time after Election Day, and every day woke up and had to, it's almost a grief, right? So when something happens, somebody passes away, and you wake up in the morning and there's that moment sometime after you wake up where you realize, oh, that person died, and it hits you. That's what this was like for me. So every morning for a period of time after the election, it hit me like I'd be having breakfast and suddenly it'd be like, oh my God, he's president. And I just needed to react to it in some way. I just felt the need. I went to the Women's March, and you can protest, and I'm never running for office, so that wasn't an option. So what do? I make photographs, and I make photographs around being gay. So I'm working on a project called Gay in Trumpland, and it's another fabric project. The project before the box was about fabric, but this is a little different. And using the fabric, very sheer fabric, as almost a membrane to keep men apart, to separate the men. And so, yeah, I've done about 5 shoots, and I'm really happy with it. I don't know how far it'll go.
Yeah. Last question. I've been doing a lot of reading and research recently on the physique magazines from the 50s and 60s. And as I think about where they were and why they existed, and then I think about what happened in the 70s and the 80s, not so much the cult work, but more about the Mapplethorpe and the Hoosier work and some of that work. And then I think about where we are today. As gay men and lesbians, and we see ourselves evolve, do you have any sense as to where this work is going to be going?
In general,
yeah,
that
25 years,
work?
50 years, because clearly gays and lesbians will continue to be a minority,
right.
and society will continue, even though we have it better off than our younger brothers and sisters.
Absolutely.
they will continue to be marginalized, and the work in many ways reflects that marginalization. That's what you've been speaking about.
We'll always be other.
Yeah.
We always will be. I mean, and I think that a lot of minority populations, it'll always be. I do think there's an aspect of assimilation that's happening that makes this kind of work in some perceived way less necessary. I don't necessarily ascribe to that, but I do think that I just know from, I'm with 18, 19, and 20-year-olds most of my day, and the gay students, for the most part, I'm talking in big generalities now, so it's that, but I've encountered a less need to really fight, less need to really, they don't see the same kind of adversity and marginalization as we did. I think they see less of a need to kind of set themselves out like that. It's very difficult on campus, on FIT's campus, to even form a gay group.
Really?
Yeah, because they don't see the need
This is
to.
a fashion school?
Yeah, but it's not that they're not out and they're not identifying. They don't feel the need to set themselves apart.
Oh. I can see that.
I mean, I don't go to bars anymore, but I mean, there's not a gay bar in Brooklyn. In my area of Brooklyn, where there used to be many in Brooklyn Heights, and there was always kind of a gay presence, but we've gone to bars in our neighborhood where everybody's mixed. Nobody knows what anybody's looking for. I don't know how they hook up, because it must be on their phones, but and I do think that they see less of a need to ghettoize like that. So I think that maybe that's where it's going. I mean, it's speculation.
Well, I do think it's interesting to see how the work will change, or whether or not the work ends up staying the same, right, in a variety of ways. But this was great. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
I really appreciate it. Really do. Thank you all. We have lots of books. Everyone needs to take one home, and Ron will be happy to sign them for you.